The Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Our guest today is Jon Shreve. Jon, you ready to be great today?
I'm ready to be great.
Jon oversees all facets of MCG growth and management. He was chairman of MCG from 2002 to 2009. He became its CEO in 2007. From 2002 to 2019, MCG has grown by over 20 times. Prior to MCG joining Hearst in 2012, Jon has been with Milliman for over 25 years as an equity principal and consultant actuary. In addition to MCG, Jon led or sponsored 20 other practices, including actuarial practices in Denver, Mexico, and Brazil, and Milliman's risk adjuster, Mara, and his medical underwriting guidelines. He's held various leadership positions, including service on Milliman's board of directors and chairman of his health product committee. Jon, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, Jon, first off, recently, he was in Orlando for a couple of weeks for a conference called HIMSS 22, I think.
Actually, I'm heading to that next week.
Oh, it's next week.
Yes.
Okay, I read it wrong on LinkedIn. So a couple of weeks. What's that all about? What is that?
So HIMSS is a very large healthcare technology conference. Pre-pandemic, about 40,000 people would attend. So it's a very large show where mostly we interact with other vendors. And this year we're focusing on showing off the new technology solutions that we're delivering.
So are you going to the sell stuff, or people trying to sell stuff to you?
To sell stuff.
Sell stuff.
Sell stuff and work with other vendors.
And this is like an annual event pre-COVID?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm guessing is it in Orlando all the time? Like change? I'm guessing they change places.
It's only in two places. It's in Orlando or Las Vegas. Those are the only two that are have enough hotel space to accommodate it.
This makes sense. So next, so doing my research, your company does very well with something called Net Promoter Score, which people don't know. Basically, it's like you get a grade for your customer service. And so your scores are very high. I think you have a high score from 94 to 92% of like vendors and people want to come back doing you. And you even have a chief customer officer. A lot of people don't have that. Can you talk about the importance of customer service to you and your company?
Yeah. And first off, I'd say when you have a high Net Promoter Score, that's going to reflect both that your products are strong and your customer service is strong, because you have to get people to give a high score to the question, would you recommend MCG? But the customer side has been very important to us in terms of making sure that our customers know how to use our products, we work with them effectively as partners. We educate them on the clinical side. We install things on the technology side. So there's just a big group. And I think part of the secret, our chief customer officer, Linda Michelow, just has a very strong sense of how to connect with customers. And her favorite saying is assume positive intent. So when you're working with a customer, even if they're a tough customer, assume positive intent. And she spreads that throughout her organization, and it's very effective.
So Jon, who is your customer?
We have two primary customers. One is a health insurance payer, and generally they're the chief medical officer or case manager there. And the other is hospitals. And again, there it's usually the case managers that we work with at the hospitals.
So Jon, I think a lot of healthcare has this bureaucratic, reputation. It's 2022. They do things the ways of 1982. Well, obviously your company's doing things pretty much up to date. How is it that you're like not so bureaucratic versus some of your other healthcare people?
Yeah, well, and you can tell that healthcare is bureaucratic because the main way that people communicate with each other in healthcare is the fax machine. And so that's, and to the extent where people have built applications that you can, even though you're doing something in technology, you then send a fax out of that technology. And now payers are looking at ways they can use NLP to read the faxes, but it's still the fax machine. But anyway, so our company was founded on the basis of evidence-based medicine. So we have a staff of doctors who goes through all the medical research to say what is appropriate care in any particular moment. And we've done this because healthcare has a lot of unwarranted variation. So some places they do it one way, some places they do it another. And health, and part of the reason for the bureaucracy in healthcare is they keep trying to find ways to solve the problem of the unwarranted variation. And so while we first provided the tools that allow you to see what's the appropriate thing to do, we're now providing the technology to make it easier for that communication between the payer and the provider to occur, and for the right decision to be made.
So, John, is this true? I might be making this up, but you might go to one hospital, X-ray might be $500. Go to X-ray at a different city or state might be $200. Is that true, or is it pricing based on hospital? How's that pricing work?
That's absolutely true, and you're estimating low. And we don't get into the pricing side of it as much as what's the appropriate care.
Okay. So you talking a little about evidence-based clinical decisions. What exactly is that?
So evidence-based says there is clinical research, usually published, peer-reviewed studies that show that something is effective or is not effective. And our editors, our physicians and nurses, look through all of this published medical literature to find what is the most appropriate thing to do. So just as examples, a fairly common procedure is a stent for your heart. And what the medical literature says is, if you do not have other symptoms, or if you have chest pain, a stent is not effective. It does not change your life expectancy. It turns out it doesn't even reduce the amount of chest pain that you have. But yet, that's often a go-to treatment that cardiologists or cardiac surgeons will use to treat things that maybe don't need treating for that. There are places where a stent's appropriate, but knowing the places they are and they aren't appropriate is very important.
So, John, what role does like insurance play in this? Because insurance has, they have the reputation, they lowball you, don't want to pay for anything. Like, how much, if it's between like the medical doctor and insurance, like who usually, this is a bad word to say, who usually wins out, I guess, like who?
So we've actually carved out a very important niche in that conversation. The most health insurance contracts are written to say, we'll pay for things that are medically necessary. And then the argument becomes, is that or is that not medically necessary? And the role that our guidelines have created is one in which that we've created a common language for the payers and the providers to use, so they can talk about when things are appropriate or not. And so my view, by the way, is insurance companies can act fairly badly and try not to pay for things, and healthcare providers can try and provide things that aren't necessary. And so how do you get a middle ground between those two? And I would say, by the way, knowing both people on both sides, most people there are very, very good, and and there are some bad actors on both sides, and you have to watch out for that. Mostly they're trying to find a way to collaborate on delivering the best care for the patients. And the trust level between them is not as high as it should be. And so and that creates a lot of the problems too.
So, John, you've been involved in the medical industry like over 20 years, right? Maybe more than that.
That's right. All my life.
All your life. So from your point of view, what are some things that have gotten better and some that have gotten worse in the past in the past?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I would say the amount of unnecessary care has come down so I'm 60 now. When I was right out of school, Milliman, and I didn't work for Milliman yet, produced cost guidelines that said the average number of days per 1,000, meaning out of 1,000 people, how many days would you spend in the hospital for a commercial population, was about 600. Now it's about 150. So the amount of extra care that wasn't necessary has come down significantly. I would say from an insurance point of view, what's gotten better is they know better how to provide appropriate customer service. So my current insurer, just sent something to us that says, oh, here's how you can freely access telemedicine under your benefit, or here's how, so they've taken advantage of technology to make the customer experience better as well. So I think while there's been a lot of pain over the years, there's also been some significant improvements in the care that's being delivered to individuals.
So John, how do y'all break down demographics, or does that matter at all? Like, do you break down like income matters, like ethics, ethnicities, race, like cities, like rural, urban, people make $100,000? Does any of that play anything with it, or is this different things done?
I'm not. So does it play a factor in what are you asking?
In the studies? In the studies y'all do?
Oh, so the studies are based on humans.
Okay.
And there's actually some interesting further pieces on that. So number one, locality does matter in terms of the treatment that's actually provided. So as you look around the country, our medical editors, we have our managing editor on the inpatient side talks about the doctors in New York, and he's a New Yorker, and how much extra things they do that are just not appropriate. On the other side, maybe one of the better places to get care is in California, where things have really been sorted out more. So there's a lot of regional variation in how care is provided. Our guidelines do not say you should get different care depending on where you're at, but it's there as well. The other thing that we've just recognized in our guidelines and in the evidence, and it's embedded in the evidence, that there are some racial things that are inappropriate. So we've just identified one. It's called a calculator. So it's to determine sort of how severe your illness is, that used race because it assumed that the body mass of African Americans was higher, which is a bad assumption. There is nothing that says that's actually true. And so we pulled that out of our guidelines, even though that was medically accepted assumptions. And on the other hand, there was something else that there was another calculator in which Asian Americans or Asians were not given a different treatment, where there actually is evidence that their body type is different. And so what we're trying to do is reflect the evidence, but not sort of built-in assumptions in society that might tell you that you should treat people in, sort of, when does it tell you should treat people differently by race inappropriately, and when should it tell you to treat people differently by race appropriately? So it's and having said that, most of the guidelines have no mention of race in them, because it really doesn't affect most treatment decisions.
So these guidelines that you do, like, who approves them? Like, somebody in your company, does someone from the government have to oversee them? How's that work?
We have a heavy review process to create the guidelines. So we'll take the evidence, an editor review it. We have then a managing editor who reviews what the editor wrote. And this actually goes back to a peer review process we had at Milliman before we joined Hearst. And then when that's all done, we'll send the guideline to a subspecialist in that field to make sure, again, that our guidelines, which are written more by generalists, still reflect everything that's going on in that subspecialty. So we have multiple levels of review to make sure that the guidelines are appropriate. But having said that, we remain independent, and we don't have any entity that approves or disapproves what we're saying. We feel that we're the sort of right down the center guideline about any particular topic.
So John, the clinical editors, is it safe to presume they're like not like high school graduates? They pretty much pretty well educated and a lot of training and background to do that job?
Yes. So they're either licensed doctors or nurses. The doctors generally have not only done all the medical training, but have had further experience in literature review and understanding what's in that. The editors are actually a very interesting breed. They they just love to sit at home and read articles and figure out the conclusions from them. And they're pretty, and then they hire more, and they're pretty picky about who is allowed in to be able to do it. So yeah, the editors are some of the smartest people you'd meet.
So is this their full-time job, or are they also doctors and do this like on the side?
This is their full-time job. We
Okay.
have a couple who continue to practice on a Saturday just to keep their hands in it. We have one here in Seattle. We have one surgeon, and she practices still on Saturday and writes the guidelines the rest of the week.
So by doing this, does this help advance their career some kind of way, or just do this because basically they love doing it?
It's often this is what they do after they've done the other things. So it's yeah, so they're doing it because they love doing it.
Okay. So next, let's talk about the tech piece of healthcare. I believe your company's like having to leverage AI, other tech pieces. Can you talk about how the tech's playing in healthcare, and is healthcare like up to date with tech, behind tech, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Clearly, healthcare is a very big field, so different pockets of it have different degrees of sophistication. In the space where we're talking about the clinical decision support and the approval for prior authorization or concurrent authorization, the history is one where until fairly recently, we would refer to it as phone and fax hell, in which the providers would call in to try and get something approved, and you can just imagine how that might go, or they'd send a fax in to get the same thing. We introduced a solution probably 6 years ago now, maybe more, called auto authorization, in which you could go through a portal to talk about the patient that you're treating and asking for approval for something. And I'd say that quickly turned into phone, fax, and portal hell. So that now you can go on a portal, but for a provider, you have to go to every payer's different portal and enter this information in different formats every time. So that didn't work out great. Now we have something sort of two paths right now. One piece called collaborative care, the other called Da Vinci. In collaborative care, if you're in a hospital and you're already documenting the MCG guidelines, collaborative care allows you to push a button, and that episode shows up in the payer's software, where they can either automatically or with human intervention review and approve or not that particular request. And right now we have Cleveland Clinic using that solution, sending it to a payer in Ohio, CareSource, and it's early on in the process. Da Vinci, Da Vinci is the sort of overall industry standard, where it says, out of the electronic medical record, of which there are a handful that people use, you can send a request and the payer needs to respond with, here's the information I need, maybe here's my standard, send it back, and then that approval process works. This is fairly new standards within the industry. What MCG is adding to that standard that's not contemplated by it is something that actually looks inside the electronic medical record, and using our guidelines reads the record and says, oh, I can see where that meets the guideline, or I don't see where it meets the guideline and it needs further review to figure it out. And when you use that technology, which we call Synapse, hospitals who've started to use it on their own have reduced the review time of a case manager from 15 minutes to under a minute to say this is appropriate or not appropriate care. So what we're doing, right, the technology today is really making this whole process much, much more efficient. And we're at the start of a curve to really roll this out across the country.
John, what happens if like someone doesn't follow your guidelines, and how do you find out if they don't follow guidelines? There's a way to do that.
So if someone does not follow the guidelines, then the payer will say that's not medically appropriate, and they won't approve it. Now, in some cases, that means, from a patient point of view, that'll be seen as big bad insurance company denied my care. From an insurance company point of view, it'll say the viewpoint is here's a physician who's trying to prescribe the wrong thing given the situation. And so the way we can stop that from happening is saying that we won't pay for it. So if you're a patient and your care gets denied, your real question should be, was I being recommended something that wasn't necessarily appropriate? The tougher situation comes like if you come in through the emergency department and the hospital starts treating you inappropriately, that can lead to financial problems because the payer is trying to get the insurance, to get the hospital to follow the guidelines. And sometimes the patient can get stuck in the middle of that.
So this might be off the subject, but would it be better if healthcare was nonprofit instead of for-profit?
It's interesting when you look at, like a nationalized system like the UK or Canada, and how that varies from where we are. So I would say the problem that we have is that the profit motive causes the providers to try and do too much. The problem you have on the other side is the constrained budgets cause the providers to not do enough. And so I'm not sure which one's better or worse. We have a person who's on the staff right now whose father in Canada is going through things, and they're being really frustrated by not having good access to the care that they're looking for. So then when you get inside of like a hospital or an insurance company that's for profit or not for profit, on the insurer side, I've been inside of both, and I don't really see difference in behavior. So you still have good people on both sides of it. Does the profit, the profit margins of both those organizations are very low, even when you are for profit. And same thing on the hospital side. I'm not sure I see a huge difference. I think people who are at one or the other would, defend very strongly.
Yeah.
Those pieces of it, but in the end, everybody, again, most everybody is working to say what's the best thing for the patient, and there's a lot of work that happens because of that.
Yeah, I was on for 25 years because now I'm on Tricare, the VA stuff.
Yes.
And I tell people, socialized medicine, this is all like it's cracked to be sometimes,
Yeah, well, yeah, and in Tricare, and when I was a consultant, I did a lot of Tricare work. So the military treatment facilities are kind of the socialized medicine in that they have a fixed budget. And so they can do a very nice job sometimes, and at other times they don't have the capacity. And the reason they created Tricare is so that you have a place to go other than VA or military treatment facility if they don't really have the ability. So they have a safety outlet for that care.
Yeah, I know at JBLM, like you don't even see a doctor at JBLM anymore. So it's also some kind of nurse practitioner. If you see an actual doctor like this, something usually probably seriously wrong with you.
Watch out.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's happening throughout medicine, is that the nurse practitioners who can do a lot of things very well are taking care of a lot of things they can do quite well.
So the nurse protects, are they like getting extra pay for this stuff doing the doctor's job, or like they just have to step and do more? Or
a nurse practitioner in some ways is a step between a nurse and a doctor, who usually gets paid more than a nurse, but not as much as a doctor. So
yes. So do doctors have like a net promoter score or customer service thing they get, like maybe a doctors for Yelp or like something like that? Or how do doctors get graded on that? Or they're supposed to do their job, and if they have bad customer service, they just have bad customer service?
The whole question of quality rankings for providers is an interesting question. So if you have, there's a particular score that Press-Ganey is an organization that will give providers scores. And if you have a high Press-Ganey score, it might mean that you have a very palatial waiting room, as opposed to that the care that you received is the aligns best with what's medically necessary. That's very hard to measure from outside looking in. So yeah, you can get a review, but maybe the individuals receiving it, aren't as strong of a judge. And I'd say, patients are very good judges of, are their doctors listening? Are they hearing what's going on there? And at the same time, do they know that do they know that the care, that it's sort of like going to an auto mechanic. If you don't know how to repair a car, oh, I need to do this for you. How do you know? And it's very hard to judge.
So back when I was growing up, we had a family doctor. I don't think there's much of a family doctor anymore. Do you think we'll ever get back to the time where there's a family doctors again?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably the move right now is folks like Walmart and CVS are creating clinics that are inside their stores that probably will promote some fairly standardized good care. And maybe you build a relationship with those folks, maybe not. There are also on the Medicare side, there are organizations who are doing a very nice job of treating the whole patient. So there's IORA, there's Oak Street, and what they're doing is helping the patients understand all the inputs to health, diet and exercise and stress, and the clinics actually lead them through how to figure that out. And their results are that they have fewer medical problems in terms of fewer hospital admissions or emergency admissions or things along those lines. So sort of treating the whole patient really works. And they're not a family doctor, but they're, there's a good, strong relationship that you can build there.
So John, I mean, besides obviously malpractice, when should someone try to, I don't want to say get rid of the doctor, but change doctors?
I haven't thought about that question. I think it's probably the most important thing is do you feel listened to by your doctor? Do you think they're paying attention to your needs and what happens there? Malpractice, or if they're recommending a lot of interventions, that might be a good time to double check, because quite often the best intervention is the more conservative one, as opposed to taking you through a lot of things. In fact, I'll give you a favorite example of that one that one of our editors before was talking about. So he said, if you have lower back pain, he says the following 4 interventions all have the same outcomes: bed rest, physical therapy visits, chiropractic visits, or surgery. So from a patient's point of view, which one would you choose? And most likely it's not going to be D, right? It's going to be A, B, or C.
Exactly. So John, looking at your crystal ball, what do you see as the future of healthcare moving forward?
So the place that we're trying to get to in healthcare, and I think we'll get there, but it's going very slowly. It started all the way back in the 90s where we started talking about it. It's something called value-based care. And value-based care is something where the providers are not paid based upon doing more services, but rather paid per person, and potentially with a higher payment for people who have good outcomes. So they're not getting paid to do more things, they're getting paid to do the right things. And that means that, in effect, the healthcare providers end up taking the role of the insurance company, or at least 90% of the role of the insurance company. Sometimes they still have to be insured against, so I get a patient who needs a transplant. But they get most of the way there and taking the risk. And then they, where the payer and provider are fighting right now, it's all internalized into one system. And Kaiser's not a bad example of that kind of system, where they take the risk and they provide the care. And I think that's the place that we need to end up. And we're heading in that direction, and the government is pushing in that direction, other folks are as well. And then our guidance becomes, inside your value-based care organization, what's the right thing to be doing, but not how should you fight about it.
So are medical rules like the same across the world, or do we have our own set of rules? UK has a set of rules, Brazil has a set of rules. Or is that some kind of like worldwide organization that oversees like all the medical stuff, so to speak?
There is not worldwide coordination of what's the most appropriate care, and there is a fair amount of variation. Our guidelines are used somewhat in Latin America, where to help guide care, but in like the UK, they have something called NICE guidelines. NICE stands for something, but they tend to be, I'd say, much narrower and don't cover as many cases as what we would cover. But it does guide the National Health Service in terms of what's appropriate or not. So there unfortunately is not a good worldwide standard other than all the published evidence that people could review and come to a conclusion about.
And then so like suppose a doctor's trained in the United States, another one's trained in Brazil, another one's trained like say Ecuador, another one's trained in Saudi Arabia. Is all the training pretty much the same, or like there's different levels to it? Like if you're a doctor in Saudi Arabia, can you come to the States to automatically be a doctor and vice versa?
So I think, and I'm not an expert here, but the training is pretty similar. I don't know that the licensing requirements are similar, so I don't know if you can just show up and do the care. The interesting part about medical school is that they teach you what the current evidence says and what's the right thing to do based upon what we know now. There was a famous speech a doctor gave, I think it was at Harvard Medical School graduation, where he says, 20 years from now, half of what we've taught you will be wrong. Unfortunately, we don't know which half yet. And so the problem becomes more with the dating of knowledge than it is with the knowledge that people start with.
I'm guessing when you're in medical school, they teach you how to be a doctor, but for those who want to go on medical practice, they don't teach anything about business, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I've certainly heard doctors talk about, I was not ready for the business side of things.
So next, talk about something futuristic. So I started watching a show on Nat Geo called Year Million, and they make all these wild predictions for the future, like a long time ago. One of the predictions is that in the future, we're going to implant little robots in ourselves, and the robots are going to fix everything inside us, like cure cancer, cure HIV, fix viruses. Any chance that's going to come anytime soon? Is that like really all way out in the future? Like that's like craziness.
I don't know. It's things are happening. My favorite innovation right now is it's now being advertised on TV, but we had guidelines for it about 4 or 5 years ago. Is instead of a colonoscopy, you can do a stool sample, which tests the genetic material in your stool to see if there's any cancer DNA in that, and it's much less invasive and within like 3 points of effective of finding cancers to something that's a miserable procedure of a colonoscopy. So we're moving forward to the point of robots. I don't know if we get there or not, or we probably do at some point, but it never moves as fast as you'd expect.
No, yeah, I know you're talking about that. It seems like I see that commercial for that colon guard like every day. Seems like
Cologuard, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there any like, of course, America, we talk about, like, obesity, health, like heart attacks, stuff like that, cancer. Is there anything medical out there that's like really dangerous to like anyone in particular that we're not really paying attention to?
We have a lot of bad habits that create problems, and the one thing I've learned is looking at examples of, so I'm an actuary by background, so I haven't seen all the medicine in practice, but as you get to the older ages, the large number of things that can go wrong. So the doctors will say, when I have a Medicare patient, there's not one thing wrong, there's 6 things wrong, and figuring out what's there. I personally think functional medicine, which is closer to what I was talking about for those Medicare groups that practice, of really understanding how diet affects you, how exercise affects you, et cetera, probably has a bigger impact than actual medical, and not just probably, has a bigger impact than medical interventions do. And so in the end, it's taking care of yourself that matters more than what the healthcare system does.
John, let's switch now to your role as a CEO. Can you go like in a and of course there's no things a regular day for you as CEO, but what do you usually do day to day as a CEO?
So I have a philosophy as a CEO that the fewer decisions I make, the better. That is to say, if I make a decision, then people will start assuming I want to make every decision of that type, and they'll stop doing things. And so I'd rather that they make those decisions, and they don't come to me to say, is that okay? Is that okay? Is that okay? So as a result, my days tend to be more, working with my direct reports, spending time sort of looking at strategy with people, but other people are sort of building that up, and we're working through it. At one level, making the executive team make decisions is more of my role than making decisions. So I'm a strong believer that culture, it's actually a Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for lunch. And we very much live by that. And so we're always looking at how we make the environment for people to work and succeed as strong as possible. And that leads to the high NPS that we have. It leads to very high employee engagement rates as well, so that if the employees are very happy, then our customers are going to be very happy.
Do y'all have a board of directors?
We do not.
So you're a private company?
So we were part of Milliman, the actuarial consulting firm. In 2012, we carved out of Milliman and became part of Hearst Corporation. Hearst Corporation is actually in a trust fund. So Hearst is the newspaper publisher, et cetera. And when William Randolph Hearst died in the 50s, he put it all in a trust fund. And so
that's a hell of a trust fund.
Oh, it is. And it continues probably for about 20 more years, until his last descendant, who was alive on the day he died, also dies. That's the ending of the trust fund. So I report to the president of Hearst Health. We have 5 sister companies, and he reports to the president of Hearst. Hearst has a board of directors, but I have just those 2 individuals that I'm accountable to. And we did have a board when we were part of Milliman, sort of internal, that of the partners who owned a piece of the Milliman Care Guidelines, former name. And let me tell you, having this structure that I have right now is way easier than having a board.
So John, how do you keep up to date with everything? Things change all the time. Things get updated. You get the new learnings. How do you keep up to date and make sure you're keep up with all that stuff that you need to be an effective CEO?
Yeah. It's at one level, I rely a lot on my the people who work in the company who have specialized knowledge in various areas. But I'd say I can't rely on them too much, because their tendency is going to be toward making the current business better as opposed to advancing to the next business. And so if I do have a job, it's pushing people beyond the current answers and into the future ones. I might not be as good as I should on keeping up on all the technology that's out there, all the healthcare that's out there, all the management practices that are out there. So I work at that, but it's a mix between relying on others but I do a lot of reading, I guess I'd say.
So John, neither one of us spring chickens anymore, right? We're not, our 20s are way behind us.
Mm-hmm.
So why keep doing this, right? I mean, you have the focus of fire. It seems like you don't want to give value, contribute to society. Why doing that choice versus, going home, retiring, and being in the rocking chair?
Yeah, it'd be boring. Yeah, I'm in a position where I could retire if I wished. When I think about that and what I would do, it's like, no, this is much more interesting to me. and I started with this, being involved with the company back in 2002, 2001, and we've been growing it and we keep growing it. And so it's fun. So my short answer is I'm going to keep doing this as long as it's fun. Uh, and I'm physically able, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, I think they're saying out there that I'm going to work until I'm 10 toes up.
Yeah, I don't know if that's me or not, but I certainly haven't gotten close to thinking, oh, I'll give this up.
So, John, for your direct reports of people that are around you, like how do you mentor them, or how do you make sure you professionally develop them so they can grow in their careers?
You have to do everybody differently. So you have to understand what their motivations are, and how you can support them, which means asking them what they're thinking about, and we have, there's a rule that an HR person gave me that said in development, 70% is sort of on the job, 20% is coaching, and 10% is education. And so sort of on the ongoing decisions that people are making, it's more spending time with them, helping them figure out their current decisions, but it's also providing those, the 20 and the 10, and figuring out what's there. And we have some people who are like, they're pretty content where they are and they don't want to go further. And there are others who clearly want to go further, and then it's helping them see blind spots and helping them figure out where to go from there. So it's very individualized, maybe is the very short answer.
So, John, let's say you bring someone on, right? Are you able to tell with a certain number of months or days, like they're going to work out, not going to work out? Do you have a method for that?
At the executive level, it never emerges that quickly. So it can take a period of time to really see if it fits or not. And it's very important to the company that I don't keep somebody there, especially who doesn't fit into the culture, but also who's not producing. But it can take years to figure that out as well. So and when you finally make the decision someone's not the right fit, it's always, you should have done it much earlier. But I think that's probably true of everyone.
Yeah.
But no, and early on, if there are gaps, I coach to them, because most people at an executive level are ready to adjust what they're doing to get there, and some aren't. But so you learn that over time too.
So, John, how do you do your schedule? Are you working like 10,000 hours a week? Are you working like 20 hours a week? You work, like how do you work through that? Like, how do you make sure balance that with, of course, not, burning yourself out?
Yeah. So I probably average about 50 hours a week. One of the things that I do that's contrary to most people is, instead of creating clear lines between work and home, I blur them. So I'm okay if on a weekend I'm working on something that I want to, and usually it's because it's interesting, I get something done there. I'm okay if during the week I take a break, and my biggest hobby, by the way, is Scrabble. So if something on Scrabble is coming up, I'll deal with it in the middle of the day. So just sort of let it blur, but I'm still like I said, I estimate around 50 hours.
So, John, how do you make sure you take care of yourself? How do you make sure, John's taken care of, your wellness taken care of?
So from a diet point of view, I'm a while ago, maybe 20 years ago now, doctor said, "Oh, you're pre-diabetic. You have to watch that." And with time, I started keeping a food diary, and this is the Actuary coming out, and every day would take my weight and my fasting blood sugar the next morning, and then I started building a least squares fit model to say what foods are working and not working for me. And so I've sort of learned for me personally, what are the things that I can eat and don't eat that fit with that. And now my blood sugars are low enough that I'm not considered pre-diabetic because I've managed it there. I'm not quite as good at exercise, but I try and keep keep some level of focus on that. And for stress, that's a big deal for a lot of people. I'm lucky enough to have a disposition that doesn't get stressed out that easily, so I don't worry about that as much, just because it's not as big a deal.
So what's a food that you shouldn't be eating, but you just love to eat?
Bread.
Bread's your food. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll do that. So in my day to day, we just don't have bread around the house, but if it's offered to me at a restaurant or something, it's pretty hard for me to resist.
And your company is across, you have employees and people across the nation?
Yes. Yep. So we have 400 employees total and about half, maybe a little less now, are located in Seattle, and the rest are spread out throughout the country.
So obviously you can hire new people yourself, right? Someone else is doing it for you, doing it for the company. How do you make sure your culture and values and visions stay the same with new people coming on when you can't talk to them one-on-one?
Yeah, and we've done pretty well with that prior to the pandemic. It's been tougher during the pandemic because part of the way, and we call it pouring the glue back in, is pulling people together into our all staff meetings, having departments that have retreats, having times where people are together, in addition to just sort of the ongoing work that we have with them and figuring that out. So we've really missed the in-person pieces during pandemic. We actually did a kickoff. We have brand new office space last month, and we kicked it off and we got 90 people into the office. It was great to actually get people together. So it's but it's you have to have executives, and to the extent you can, leaders who are aligned with the culture as well, for it to spread throughout the organization. If your leaders are not aligned, and we went through a time period like this about 10 years ago, everything falls apart. So I learned from there that the alignment of your executives is critical to keeping your culture going.
And pre-COVID, was it everyone came to office pre-COVID?
Here in Seattle, yes.
Okay.
And then half the people that we have small offices in San Diego, Denver, and Austin, but for everybody else who works remotely, they were working remotely before COVID as well. People in Seattle were coming in all the time.
So can you talk about some of the challenges of you have remote workers, you have hybrid workers, and people come to office? I don't think you can manage all the same, right? So how do you work through manage them differently? And somebody be a remote worker, they might not get promoted because they've never come in. No one knows the leadership style, decision-making process. When someone coming in, you get to see them every day, right?
Right.
So how do you work through those things?
So, and again, it's kind of pre and post-COVID, two different answers, but pre-COVID, departments that were remote were largely remote, the whole department. So it wasn't like, oh, this person's coming in, so they have an advantage or something along those lines. We had all of our account managers working remotely, all of our clinical editors working remotely, and they would come together at the same times. In a hybrid workforce, which we're heading to now, most of our software developers are here in Seattle, and some of them are already coming in daily into our new office, and others have yet to come in. And I think we're still learning how to balance that. And our rule of thumb right now is there's no requirement to come into the office on any set schedule. However, if your team is working on something and you need to get together, that's when you need to come into the office. So come in when it's valuable, and not just for the sake of coming in. And we're starting to do that, and people are still sort of figuring out what that means. And I just talked to a manager today who said, oh, I have two people who are really nervous about coming in. They have got to come in, what do I do on that? And for the short term, we'll let that happen. And for the intermediate term, it'll be like encourage them back and get them in for those meetings, and so that they can connect. But people totally reacted differently to COVID in terms of how they felt about safety.
Yeah. So John, let's say there's a like COO out there, CFO out there, basically someone out there at the executive level, they want to become a CEO. What advice you have to them to prepare to be a CEO, put themselves in position to compete for a CEO position at a major corporation?
In the end, I think this is true of actually most positions, is the best way to get to the next position is start acting like you're already there. Now that doesn't mean, take, surreptitiously start doing things on behalf of them. But it means, the CEO's job is the guardian of the company. It has to make sure things are the decisions are always being made best for the sake of the company. And someone who's close to that needs to be thinking about, it's almost don't do politics, do what's best for the company. Because if you do politics, maybe you get, and I've never been a believer here, but maybe you get to a place where you could maneuver yourself into that role. Much more likely, people are going to say, oh, that person's the natural pick to be in this role based upon their current behavior. And certainly when I think about the people I would choose as my successors, that's what's true about them. They're the ones who are looking out, they're my confidants that when I, trying to figure out what's best for the company, they're the ones who I go to be a sounding board and so forth. So it's, act in the fashion that a CEO should act, and you're much more likely to be considered for that than if you, do more, I don't know, political things.
So John, they tell people all the time, network all the time. If you have a job, network. Don't have a job, network. Put yourself out there. As a CEO, do you network? And if you do, what's your networking strategy?
I probably don't network as much as I should. So I do some social media stuff that, regular postings on LinkedIn and so forth, and build up the network more with our customers than anything, and connect there. The place I should probably network more is with vendors that are in our space, but not exactly in our space, so sort of the frenemies. Because over the long term, I think there could be more connections that build up there. So yeah, I'm an introvert by nature, so maybe I don't do it as well as some, but
yeah, I'm an introvert too.
Yeah, so it's but I think there's still good ways. And actually HIMSS is a place where we have a number of partners whose software we integrate with, and HIMSS becomes a great chance to meet all of the partners because they're exhibiting there as well.
Yeah, so you might laugh at this, right? So I'm an introvert, right? So even though I do this podcast, you're like a minute late. Whenever I always hope, the little part of me always hopes the person doesn't come, right? So I'll do the podcast.
Yeah, no, I believe that. So it's always like, well, maybe I don't have to do this, but
Exactly.
Yeah.
So back to doctors for a minute. Of course, doctors, they get out of medical school, like all that money, student loans, whatever, and they're like 500. Of course, it makes like $500,000 of debt, and then is there a way to fix that? I mean, like, it's not like there's such an undue burden on them, right?
So, first answer is I don't know any good way to fix it. But I'll also say that I feel like education and healthcare have a lot in common. So there are public goods that there's a lot of other people's money involved in. And so when other people's money are involved in paying for something, prices tend to rise. And when prices rise, the people who receive the money, the doctors, the professors, etc., start believing that that's their intrinsic worth. and so so it becomes very hard to change that trajectory of spending more and more money in those areas. So when I went to college, even at a strong college, the annual fee was $7,500. And that same college now is 60,000. And I taught, so because I contribute to them, they talk to me about what's going on. But they clearly can't see how they could run it at a lower rate. Their best answer is, well, we'll give more financial aid to middle class kids, because we were taking care of the lower class kids, and the upper class kids were paying themselves, and it's the middle ones who are getting squeezed out by our high prices. So we'll give more financial aid to them, but not, our cost structure is too high. And I think, and I'm not an expert in education at all, but I see such parallels with healthcare. I think that both places have such high cost structures that they create their own problems. So you can see the similarities. Oh, I'm $500,000 in debt because I graduated medical school, or other advanced education, or I went bankrupt because I had a medical procedure. Both of them are they expect this level of money, and it places undue financial burden on individuals who weren't expecting that this would happen to them. And so it's at the core, we have to think about how we can do things more efficiently and maybe reduce expectations on what people should be paid, which is very, very hard to do. So I'm not like I know how to get to that point, but that's I think that it's all very structural, that's very hard to undo.
So John, in your background, you're I think you say actuary.
Actuary, yeah.
Can you talk about that some? What is that?
So an actuary is the odds maker behind an insurance company. So it's a heavy duty math background, that very difficult field to get into, and it's often, I don't know if it still is, but years ago in the jobs rated almanac would always be like the number 1 or number 2 job, in terms of how much people enjoyed being an actuary.
And when was the last time you actually did that?
Right before we went to Hearst.
Okay.
So there's a continuing education requirement, that I stopped doing when we joined Hearst. So
Okay.
I'm still an actuary, and I still have opinions, but I'm no longer qualified to give statements of actuarial opinion. So it's so I don't do that in my current role at all.
So John, for any young people out there, or people like getting out of college or trying to figure out what they want to do in life, or maybe people just maybe in 30s, 40s and trying to figure stuff out, maybe switching jobs, what advice would you have for them?
Well, certainly, if you have the aptitude, actuary is a great field. But beyond that, it's I'm not a very good career counselor in that regard. It really has to do with what you love, because it's what you shouldn't do is get into a field that you think is supposed to be good, and then you find out that it's not really what I enjoy doing, and now you're stuck. So it's got to be something that you really like doing.
So John, back to what you do as a CEO. What's something that's fun for you as a CEO? Something like you wish like you just passed on someone else, but you have to do it because you're the CEO.
Yeah. What's most fun is just working with people to accomplish our goals and seeing that come to fruition. Least fun is probably, well, certainly when you have personnel issues, it's never fun. Yeah, sometimes there's bureaucratic things from our parent corporation that aren't fun. They've gotten better at that, I'd say. And they're still, and if any of them are listening, there's still a ways to go.
You kind of answered this before, but so suppose wants to be a CEO. Is this like some kind of training course they can take, or like something online, or is this basically they got to learn to do on their own, right? and get
Yeah, I don't
do
think
mentorship?
there are certainly business schools and executive courses in business schools that can help you think about how to deal in particular situations, whether it's strategy or culture or both. Um, uh, but it's kind of something you grow into, I think. And me becoming a CEO, I didn't follow a normal path. But I first learned as I was leading my consulting firm in Denver. Um, I read a lot of business books during that time. I don't read as many now, but I read a lot of business books to help me figure out what worked, what didn't work, so forth, and thinking about it and applying it. And excuse me. And uh, the yeah, I think you can supplement a lot, but in the end, it's a self journey.
So the age-old question: Are good leaders made or they born? From your point of view,
Made.
made.
Yeah. So, certainly for me, if you look at me as a kid, you have no idea that I'm heading for this position. And at a young age, I was a math whiz, uh, extremely shy, and it's only through really loving business that I figured out how to do the people side. So it's probably the business that I love, and then the people side I've learned to love as well. So it's no, I didn't know how to do this at all.
So next question: Would you say people learn more from great leaders, or they actually learn more from bad leaders?
um, Probably great leaders. So great leaders give you lots of examples to follow. Bad leaders give you a handful of things definitely not to do. So it's and I think some people don't always recognize all the bad things bad leaders are doing, so they think there's some of them that they should be following, and so it's probably a pretty mixed message from a bad leader.
Yes. So for your staff, are those like people like get promoted from within the company? Do you hire from without the company? How's that usually work for y'all?
We do both. Uh, if at all possible, we hire from inside, and there are times where it's not possible. And in fact, um, we're right now going through some leadership changes on the executive team. So the head of sales left, um, and we didn't have anyone with the depth of experience to be in that role. But I know that going outside for that role is very risky. So we took someone who was a star salesperson, who's been a director, sort of the level below the VP of sales for 2 years, but sort of saw the cultural alignment with where he's at and promoted him. And at the same time, because he was a little greener, we took the marketing area, which reported to sales, and pulled that out and made that separate. Now, 2 internal hires, and our director of HR just left, and we don't have anybody who would fit that role inside the company, so we're hiring outside. So to me, it's error on the side of promoting from within, because we can keep our culture best that way, but don't be afraid of hiring from without either.
So for your company's mission and vision statement, it's really concise, like maybe 1 or 2 sentences each.
Yes.
A lot of companies have like these 10,000 page flowering documents, blase, blase, and all this. And I think the more concise, the better.
Mm-hmm.
First, why is it so concise? And tell me, how hard was it to make it so concise?
Yeah, it's very hard to make it concise. I think we knew going in that we wanted to do that. And actually we had a group who worked on it. And the mission, I'll test myself, see if I can repeat it, but the MCG family provides patient-centered guidance to the healthcare community through content technology and customer service. And there are so many concepts built into that mission statement that we had to work at. And the most interesting one, so patient-centered is sort of our true north. We always write the guidelines for the patient, which is why both payers and providers trust us. That we're doing it through content technology and customer service was the first time we really talked about being beyond content and how it's really a three-legged stool that comes there. But the interesting part was we then rolled this out at an all staff meeting, and people were like, but where's the passion? Well, we have a lot of passion for what we're doing. And at the meeting where we rolled it out, and then some breakouts where people gave input and so forth, we changed it from MCG provides patient center to the MCG family provides patient centered guidance. And that was our code internally about the passion we have about delivering a mission. And so it's something that you both want to encapsulate as simply as you can, so that people are aligned with it, but you also want to, so we added elements into it as well based upon the feedback. So it's an interesting trade-off that you have to think about.
Jon, how often do y'all review this? Like once a year, once a quarter, every 2 years? How often like review and make sure it's still up to date and has the value and qualities that you want for your company?
Mission and vision are not that frequently. So I would put it more in the 5 to 10 year range.
Okay.
We also have these cultural statements and behaviors we talk about, and we put those out 3 years ago, and we're talking about them now again. So something, so we sort of test and look at it. And part of the problem with those is they aren't concise enough. So we're working from that point of view. So yeah.
And so you talk about this some a little bit too, but as far as culture, now culture strategy for business, people being remote, all that kind of stuff. And how do you make sure the culture stays the same? Like, how do you make sure that this is a culture versus, because it seems like you're going to hire based on culture versus skill set sometimes. How do you make sure the culture matches what you want, how it fits, all that kind of, all that?
So there's a great book by Patrick Lencioni called The Ideal Team Player. And that's probably our blueprint for hiring for culture. So there's a lot of difference in culture, and our editors used to be centralized in San Diego. They're now spread throughout the country, and our software developers are here in Seattle. And I used to say, culture varies. So for the editors, a great team building event would be a trip to a museum. For the developers, a great team building event would be Ride the Ducks, right? So there are different, you can't say everybody is the same, and we're not the same. We're saying everybody's dedicated to the same mission. People have the right attitudes about being on a team, and then people are very different beyond that, and that's good, and that's good for us, for us to be all over the place in terms of who we are and what we are.
So Jon, for your company, when you hire someone, and for the people you hired since you've been there, has there been consistent one characteristic that everyone has that you can say, okay, they have this characteristics, they'll probably be successful at this company?
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't. If we had it that easy, we'd be wonderful at hiring, but we still make our mistakes, and we still, so it's, but we're also, we have some people who are very good at ferreting out whether someone's a good cultural fit or not, and I'll rely on them when we're trying to figure that out.
So I'm assuming that you do a lot of hiring in your company. So if someone wants to work for you, is how do they get your attention? Like, do this, like, apply for the job online? There's something they should do to, like, bring attention to themselves, so to speak?
Yeah. So I would say, watch our job postings and apply for the job. In the current VP of people that we're hiring for right now, people will send me LinkedIn notes or come in through other channels, and I'll say to them, apply on, go back and apply, because there's no reason why I'd want to give a leg up just because someone happened to do that. I'd rather get a good solid process where we're being fair about what we're doing.
It makes sense. But of course, a lot of people will tell you, send a LinkedIn email, do a direct message or Twitter,
Yep. No, it's and that probably works some of the time. It doesn't work as well with me, and I'm not sure how well it works with other people at MCG. It might work. It might work a little better. And actually, one of our, especially on the clinical side, our great source of hiring is our customers. So our customers can be as dedicated or sometimes more so to our evidence-based content than we are. And they become great employees because they both understand our customers and they really appreciate what we're doing. And so that's an important funnel to us as well.
So this HR person you need to hire, is there any like background you're looking for? Like that you have to be in healthcare, to have to be like HR director of a certain number, like a certain size company?
Yeah. So yeah, we're looking for, I don't have a precise rule about has to be this or has to be that, but we are biased toward technology companies and possibly healthcare. We put the job application out there, and people who said, "Oh, I've been director of HR at this hospital for all this time," doesn't really fit who we are. So that's a very
Just a little different.
yeah, it's a very different thing than the multi disciplinary roles that we have. And we have we have people who do very different things within the company.
So someone is like a VP of a HR someone's a VP HR of a health tech company, and then someone else is a VP of HR for John Deere. The John Deere, the guy might be,
Right. The health tech company is on. Now we could be totally wrong, and the John Deere person could be perfect fit for the job, but we have to screen the resumes down to a workable number. By the way, we got more than 1,000 online applications.
I could imagine.
So it's and people say, "Oh, we have labor shortage," but we weren't running into that problem there. We got lots and lots of applications.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I tell a lot of people look for jobs, like you got to realize you're gonna probably be. I think the average job has 250 applicants, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
hard.
hard.
Something that stands out, and often standing out is not things that you can do. So people will write these flowery introductions to their resumes, and I'll skip over them and look at what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a so you have to stand out, and you might not be able to affect what causes you to stand out.
Yeah, like I tell people all the time, if you have a resume, you have 25 people look at it, you get 25 different opinions. Only opinion, like in your company case, it's like you and your hiring manager, right? That's the only opinion that matters. Whatever people say doesn't really matter.
Yep.
And they really have no idea what you want or don't want.
Right.
Unless they're networking with you, right?
Right. Yeah, and if they run into me somewhere, I'd probably tell them what we're looking for, but they send me LinkedIn messages, they go apply online.
So John, you talk about some, but can you talk in more detail about your company, MCG, like how it got started, what you focus on now, and what you see the vision for your company going forward?
Yeah. So how it got started. So there was an actuary here in Seattle in the late 80s who was consulting for HMOs. And he figured out he could help them figure out the price they needed to charge to get employers to offer the HMOs. But he says, but I can't help them figure out how to deliver at that price. And so he started hiring clinical consultants to consult with these companies to help them figure it out. And in a lucky break for us, he way overhired into that position, so they didn't get that much work. And so a couple of them said, well, what these guys need is guidelines, and they started creating the guidelines in their spare time. So it was originally sort of a side project for consultants. And the first guideline was in a 3-ring binder in 1988. Then in the late 90s, there was what's known in the industry as a managed care backlash. So as managed care was growing, lawyers started coming in and suing the HMOs and so forth. And when they did, they would name the Milliman Care Guidelines. This isn't the right legal term, but an unindicted co-conspirator. You're helping these guys deny care, blah, 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 blah. And at the time, our guidelines were evidence-based, but they weren't transparently evidence-based. And we hired a doctor out of Berkeley. It was another school up there, one of the UCals, and he came in and created an evidence summary, footnotes. So he created the structure that proved that the guideline that we were writing was based upon the evidence. And that was just a major turning point for the company, where before it was, here's this actuarial firm telling you what to do. Why are they telling you what to do? And it turned it into the evidence says this is the right thing to do. And we can see where it's there. And we started taking off in the 2000s. Around that time, we also started into software. So first we published the books online. But then more importantly, we created interactive software for the case manager where they could document the cases that they're attending to, and track whether they're following the guidelines or not, which then allows them in turn to look at how they could improve care by tracking to the guidelines more closely. So we became a technology company, although not in a big way in the 2000s. And then over the 2010s and more recently, we're switching into the technology I was talking about earlier, where we're saying, let's automate the process of making that decision by being able to read the electronic medical record, both through the codes that are in there and the language that's in there, and simplify that process, both in terms of the communication between the payers and the providers, and just in terms of making that decision. And so we have become a content and technology company over the years, and now we're looking at data science, and we're looking at the things that allow us to build this even further.
So John, I'll make this totally up. Like, suppose you go on vacation for a week in April, and you go on vacation again for a week in June. Are you still the CEO for your company, or do people in the executive staff take turns like filling in for you when you go on vacation, or you're another net, so to speak?
I'm still the CEO.
Okay.
And so on vacation, my habit is I look at email once a day and respond to things, and otherwise stay out, so I'm mostly disconnected, but I feel a lot, so it's more my comfort. I feel a lot more comfortable if I just see the email and respond. So I don't say, while I'm out, so-and-so's in charge. I just say I'll be out.
Okay.
And because I don't make that many decisions, most things just keep operating.
Nice. So John, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't asked you yet, or anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yes. So John, can you share your social media so people can reach out to you, whether on LinkedIn or for you and your companies?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, and you can search me at Jon Shreve MCG Health, and I'm happy to link in with people. I'm also, and I publish content on there. I publish about the same thing on Twitter. I think there I'm Jon Shreve _MCG, something like that. And MCG Health has accounts in both of those places as well that you can link with and follow.
And for listeners who have the links to your social media on the show notes, you can find the show notes at www.cabinetshr.com. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and networks. So John, we're coming to the end of our talk. Can you give us any wisdom, advice, or anything you want to talk about?
Any other wisdom?
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
No.
You good? Okay.
Yeah.
So John, thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was fun.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. And remember to be great every day.